invite people up on stage and turn up the monitors. So I'm not sure that that's the right approach, but come get close if you'd like. So I want to talk about two ideas today, and they're probably going to seem like they're tangentially related, so I'm going to ask you to sort of bear with me and get there. But the two ideas have to do with maps and they have to do with translation. So I'm going to start by risking your tolerance as a New York audience, but starting with a map of San Francisco. And my reason for this map is to point out what we usually make maps of. Maps are usually pictures of stuff that doesn't move very much. Pretty easy to make a map of a city. The streets don't really go anywhere. The neighborhoods might change over time. We might rename them eventually. But generally speaking, you can take an aerial or a satellite photograph, you can abstract it, you can refer to the infrastructure that's in a place, the streets, the subway stops, the neighborhoods, the parks, and you have a map that works well for most of your purposes. This is a different map of San Francisco, and this is a map that has some real similarities. It will also, if you look at it carefully, show you where the streets are, and particularly the highways into the city. But it's made very differently, and this is a map that was made by folks at Stamen Design, which is one of the better web design firms in the world today, in collaboration with the Exploratorium and also with Yellow Cab in San Francisco. It turns out that Yellow Cab tracks every one of their taxi cabs, and they've got GPS receivers in them. They get readings every minute of where the cabs are. And you can take this data, and what will happen very quickly is you end up with a map of the city of San Francisco, just based on where the cabs go. And this map actually tells you some interesting things that's kind of hard to pick out of a map of infrastructure. You figure out pretty quickly what are the arteries that actually make that city work. Some of them make perfect sense. You can see the bridges, you can see the main highways, but you also start pulling out patterns that might not be obvious. One of the things that this artist pointed out, if you look at those dotted lines, those are sort of non-obvious paths. Those are from poorer neighborhoods to hospitals. And that tends to be a pretty frequent cab ride as people are going and looking for medical services. So you can actually watch that pattern sort of emerge from time. The solid lines are people going from residential neighborhoods to the sort of downtown and the tourist districts of San Francisco. One of the things that I sort of love about this map, and by the way, I'm referring to maps like this as flow maps. Maps that aren't showing you what's statically there, but are showing you what's actually moving. One of the things that I love about trying to figure out flow maps is what happens when you've got dark spots on them. In some cases, the dark spots are parks, right? I mean, generally speaking, I know you guys do things differently in New York, but generally speaking, most people don't drive taxis through the parks. So they show up as dark spots. But some of these dark spots actually have another explanation, which is that one sort of down on the screen, that lowermost question mark, is Hunter's Point, which is a historically African-American neighborhood in San Francisco. It's actually a pretty high-density neighborhood. It's not particularly well served by public transit. It's just that it's real hard to get a cab there for reasons that have a lot more to do with racism than they do with infrastructure. This is what's cool about flow maps. They show you things that actually happen, not just what's possible. Infrastructure maps can be a little disconcerting, right? You guys have probably all looked at maps of the New York City subway system 1,000,001 times. You've probably never been to both ends of the number 4 line, for instance. In fact, the New York Times found this such a weird thing that they actually sent a photographer out to photograph the end of all of these different lines. Those places are theoretically part of the subway system. In practical terms, if you actually map the flow of the subway system, you'd probably find out that they're very, very sparsely used. They're not nearly as connected as you might think of all of it. So this basic idea, infrastructure is what's possible, flow is what actually happens. They map some very different things. So this relates to my work because I'm really interested in the question of how connected we all are, or disconnected. And this is a map that came out recently. I think it's just one of the prettiest things out there. And this is a map that purports to show connection and disconnection. What's being mapped here is the travel time from any point on the globe to a city of 50,000 or more people. And the idea was that cities of 50,000 or more are somehow tied into global transit networks. They're going to be connected in some real way. How long does it take you to get to one of those big cities? And what's astounding is that even in West Africa, where I do a lot of work, and I'm used to this notion of being in the town of Jolo Bogami and feeling like I'm at the end of the earth, I'm probably 2 hours away from one of these cities. To be truly, absolutely remotely disconnected nowadays sort of forces you to be in the Amazon jungle. It sort of forces you to be in the mountains of Tibet or the very, very far north. But again, this is a map, a very pretty map made from infrastructure. It basically says who's going where can you get a bus, where can you get a train, where you can get a plane, how can you find yourself tied into these more urban areas. It doesn't tell you who actually goes there. Doesn't tell you how many people in West Africa find themselves never leaving the village or how many people go there every single day. So the thing about infrastructure maps is that they can fool you, right? You sort of look at the airline maps of the world. I've been looking for one that just sort of mashes up everyone's airline routes because I probably use it as wallpaper in my office. Everyone's really proprietary about them. They sort of give you this impression that everything is equally covered. It's equally easy to get to London, which of course we all know isn't true. There's a whole lot more flights from Rome than there are from Reykjavik, Keflavik. So what happens is once you start looking at flow, you start getting a much different sense for how the world is actually connected. This is just a gorgeous visualization that was put together by some folks at Zurich University. And what they did was take data on every flight in a given day and just plotted it as a point on this visualization to sort of watch it over the course of 24 hours. And I've literally lost like a good chunk of a day just sort of playing this video over and over and over again. One of the things that you realize is that while it's theoretically possible to go from almost anywhere to anywhere else, when you look at where people actually go, enormous concentration of travel in the US and in Europe, a little bit of the Pacific Rim corridor. There's a little bit of a South America, particularly Argentina to Spain. There's almost no south-south travel. And this turns out to be true. If you actually start looking for that legendary Brazil to Accra flight, it just doesn't exist. There's almost no Africa travel as well. There's a little bit that comes from Johannesburg, and there's sort of a corridor that goes up to Europe. But what a map like this does is if you look at it long enough, it gives you a sense of where people actually go, where things actually flow, what sort of connections happen in the real world. And it's my basic contention that we'd be a lot better off building more of these maps, sort of looking for more maps that show you how people trade, ideas flow back and forth. Because I think a lot of us are imagining a world that's more connected than it actually turns out to be. So this is a slide of perhaps my least favorite product on Earth. I don't know if you guys know the story behind Fiji water. The first thing behind it is that it is actually from Fiji. What happened was that there was a Canadian entrepreneur who discovered that he was running a very high-end hotel on a Fijian island. And his guests, who were the sort of people who would come with, people bearing their luggage, would show up with cases of Evian water. And he thought this was the most ludicrous thing, that people would ship in Evian water from France to Fiji. So he started bottling water in Fiji, and he built a beautiful bottling plant, took over the domestic Fijian market, and then realized he had a lot more water than he knew what to do with. And it turns out that container shipping is so cheap that you can actually affordably ship water from Fiji. Probably shouldn't, but you can. And it's now the #2 foreign bottled water brand in the United States, thanks to very aggressive marketing and claims of green marketing and so on and so forth. But the reason I'm putting it up here is that pretty much my favorite economist, who's a French dude named Daniel Cohen, talks about imaginary globalization. What he means by this is that we think we're living in a deeply, deeply global world, where we're interconnected to an extent that's never happened in history. Cohen comes back and basically says, actually, probably not. The 1920s were probably a lot more globalized. Just in terms of how many people were living outside of their country of origin, worldwide it's about 3% today. It was about 12 or 13% in the 1920s. What we've got today is imaginary globalization. We're very, very good at catching glimpses of other countries. We're very, very good at globalizing stuff. We globalize atoms really, really well. We don't globalize people all that well, and we have a lot of tension around it. We almost never globalize bits and ideas, and that's sort of what I'm obsessed with. So the problem that I worry about, which is probably a lot less worrisome than economic collapse or swine flu, is imaginary cosmopolitanism. I want to look at what happens when we think that we're getting a really global point of view, we think that we're getting a really diverse way of looking at things, and in fact, we may not be. So I'm a net guy. I've been doing net stuff long enough that I can lay claim to the hair. And we map the net too. We're sort of obsessed with it for a while. There's a map from 1992, back when I suspect I may have been one of the few people in this room on the net. But we've kept mapping it even though it's gotten sort of farcical to do so, right? I mean, this is the last map I was able to find from a group called Opti in